A young boy vanishes without a trace from a school bus stop, leaving a town shattered and a mother broken. 10 years later, a forgotten journal hidden in a classroom desk unravels a chilling secret no one ever imagined. What follows is a journey through darkness, determination, and the miraculous return of a child the world thought was gone forever. It was a chilly autumn morning in the quiet town of Maplewood, the kind where the crisp air carries the scent of fallen leaves and faint traces of smoke from neighborhood chimneys. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the tree-lined streets where families bustled through their routines. At the corner of Elm Street, where the familiar yellow school bus was supposed to stop every weekday, a small crowd had gathered, faces etched with confusion and worry. Among them was Sarah Miller, a devoted mother whose heart pounded wildly as she scanned the empty sidewalk. Her son, Lucas, was supposed to be there by now. 8 years old, full of curiosity and bright energy, a boy who loved superheroes and adventure stories. But today, the bus had come and gone without him. He never appeared at his usual spot. Panic surged through Sarah's veins as she called his name again and again, her voice trembling. "Lucas, where are you?" The neighbors joined in the search, their voices a chorus of growing dread. The police arrived swiftly, their calm professionalism barely masking the urgency of the situation. As the hours dragged on, the search spread throughout the town. Officers combed through nearby woods and alleys, called in search dogs, and coordinated volunteers. Yet every lead faded into dead ends. Lucas had vanished without a trace. The school bus driver swore she had stopped exactly on time, and no other children reported seeing him that morning. It was as if he had simply been swallowed by the earth. The community was gripped by fear and disbelief. Parents whispered warnings to their children, and strangers eyed one another suspiciously. Sarah's grief was immediate and raw, her world tilting off its axis. Every moment felt agonizingly long as the sun dipped behind the trees, turning the sky a bruised purple. Her nights blurred into tearful vigils, staring at his empty bed, replaying every second of the morning over and over in her mind. Local news vans arrived, cameras capturing the distraught mother pleading for help, the school bus stop marked by police tape and bright flashing lights. The town rallied, but hope began to fade with each passing day. Posters with Lucas's smiling face appeared on lampposts and storefronts, his bright eyes seeming to plead for a miracle. Yet as weeks turned into months, the disappearance deepened into a mystery that no one could solve. Sarah's life fractured under the weight of unanswered questions. Friends tried to offer comfort, but the silence was deafening. How could a small boy disappear so completely? Where was Lucas? Was he scared, alone, or worse? The town's once peaceful rhythm was replaced by whispered rumors and accusations, neighbors eyeing one another with suspicion. The school bus stop, the very place where Lucas vanished, became a haunting symbol of loss. Despite the pain, Sarah clung fiercely to hope. She refused to accept that her son was gone forever. Every year, on the anniversary of that dreadful day, she returned to the bus stop, leaving fresh flowers and letters, praying for answers. But as the seasons changed, so did the people. The police file grew cold, the case fading from headlines, swallowed by time. Yet the memory of Lucas's disappearance lingered, an open wound that refused to heal. In the quiet moments of the night, Sarah whispered to the stars, begging her boy to come home. The world moved on, but for her, the day Lucas vanished was frozen in time, a cruel reminder that innocence can vanish in the blink of an eye. As Maplewood settled into a new normal, the question that haunted everyone remained: what truly happened to Lucas that morning at the school bus stop? 10 years had passed since that heartbreaking morning when Lucas Miller disappeared from the school bus stop. The town of Maplewood had changed in subtle ways. New faces appeared, buildings were renovated, and the seasons cycled through their endless rhythms. But beneath the surface, a shadow lingered. For many, the pain of that day never faded. Sarah Miller had long since moved away, seeking solace far from the whispered rumors and hollow stares that had greeted her whenever she returned home. But even miles away, she clung to a fragile hope, unwilling to let go of the boy who had vanished without a trace. At the very same school where Lucas had last been seen, life marched on with a quiet insistence. The old building wore the marks of time, peeling paint, squeaky floors, and the faded echoes of countless children's laughter. It was here, in this place haunted by memories, that a new chapter began. Ms. Grace Harper arrived one bright September morning, a fresh face among the seasoned staff. She was a passionate teacher, eager to inspire young minds. But beneath her calm exterior was a keen sensitivity that immediately sensed the unspoken grief lurking in the halls. Ms. Harper had heard fragments of the story, the mysterious disappearance, the police investigations, the years of silence that followed. To most, it was just a painful chapter closed long ago. To her, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. From a moment she stepped into the school, she felt the weight of the unsaid, a collective tension that hung like a thick fog. The classrooms, once vibrant with the energy of children, now seemed to hold their breath, as if afraid to speak aloud the secrets buried within. Every day, as she guided her students through lessons and laughter, Ms. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the school held more than just memories. It held answers. The echoes of the past whispered to her, urging her to look deeper. She found herself drawn to the classroom Lucas once sat in, imagining the bright boy with a quick smile and curious eyes who had vanished so abruptly. What fears had haunted him? What stories had he left behind? Outside the classroom windows, the town of Maplewood moved on, bustling with new hopes and quiet struggles. Yet, the pain of Lucas's loss remained a thread woven into the community's fabric. Some families had moved away, others had hardened, but no one had forgotten. Ms. Harper often caught fleeting glances from her colleagues, a mixture of sorrow and guarded hope, as if they too were waiting for something to change. Sarah, too, lived her life with a heart forever tethered to the past. She had remarried, tried to rebuild a sense of normalcy, but nothing could replace the hole left by Lucas. Every phone call, every stranger at her door, made her heart race with fear and hope. Her nights were filled with restless dreams, a mother's love refusing to fade, clinging to the fragile thread of hope that someday, somehow, her son would be found. Meanwhile, at the school, Ms. Harper's discovery was about to change everything. In a dusty corner of the old classroom, behind peeling wallpaper and forgotten memories, lay a secret that would reopen wounds and ignite a quest for truth. Little did she know, the key to unlocking a decade-old mystery rested inside a worn, leather-bound journal, a journal that belonged to Lucas Miller. As the school bell rang each morning, signaling the start of another day, an invisible tension hummed in the air. The past was about to collide with the present, and a new chapter of hope, fear, and revelation was poised to begin. For Ms. Harper, the discovery was no longer just about teaching children. It was about giving a lost boy a voice and maybe, just maybe, bringing him home. The classroom Ms. Harper was assigned to was tucked away at the far end of the school's aging hallway, a relic of a bygone era. Its worn wooden floors creaked beneath her footsteps, and the faded wallpaper bore the marks of countless years of laughter, lessons, and whispers. The room had been in use for nearly a decade, left dormant after a wave of renovations and shifting classrooms. Yet something about this forgotten space called to Ms. Harper, tugging at her curiosity and heart. As she began preparing for the new school year, Ms. Harper set to work clearing out decades of dust and forgotten remnants. Desks stacked in disarray, old textbooks crumbling at the edges, and the faint scent of musty paper filled the air. It was during this routine cleaning that her fingers brushed against a sturdy, locked wooden desk hidden beneath a threadbare tarp in the corner. The desk's lock was rusted shut, but with a bit of effort and a crowbar borrowed from the janitor, she managed to pry it open. Inside the desk was a time capsule, a small, worn leather journal with a cracked spine and yellowed pages, carefully tucked beneath a layer of faded school supplies. Ms. Harper's heart skipped a beat when she saw the name scrawled across the inside cover, Lucas Miller. She recognized the name immediately. It had haunted the town's headlines and whispered conversations for years. Here, in this forgotten desk, lay a tangible piece of the boy who had vanished so long ago. Ms. Harper sat down, the silence of the empty classroom wrapping around her like a shroud. She opened the journal carefully, as if it were a fragile relic, revealing neat, youthful handwriting that danced across the pages. At first, the entries were innocent and bright. Lucas's thoughts about school, friends, and his favorite superheroes. But as she read deeper, a shadow seemed to creep between the lines. The tone shifted. There were cryptic notes, vague references to fear, and an uneasy sense that Lucas was struggling with something far darker than childhood worries. The journal was more than just a diary. It was a map into the mind of a boy desperate to communicate but trapped in silence. There were drawings of shadowy figures, coded messages scribbled in the margins, and a recurring mention of a shadow that followed him wherever he went. Ms. Harper's fingers trembled as she realized this was no ordinary journal. It was a plea for help disguised in a child's handwriting. The discovery ignited a fire within her. She knew this journal could be the key to unlocking the mystery that had tormented the community for a decade. With each turned page, the walls of the classroom seemed to close in, the air thick with unspoken secrets. The stories Lucas had left behind called out for justice, for answers, for truth. Ms. Harper stayed long after the school bell had rung and the halls had emptied, reading every word Lucas had written. She felt a deep responsibility growing in her chest, not just as a teacher, but as a guardian of his story. The journal was a bridge across time, a voice from the past begging to be heard. As night fell outside the school windows, the world outside seemed unaware of the revelation unfolding within those walls. But for Ms. Harper, the discovery marked a turning point. The quiet classroom, the dusty desk, and the hidden journal were about to unravel secrets that no one had dared to face for 10 long years. The journey to find Lucas, to understand what had truly happened, had just begun. Ms. Harper's days quickly filled with the unfolding mystery contained in Lucas's journal. Each morning, before the first student arrived, she would sneak into the quiet classroom and pore over the fragile pages, trying to piece together the fragments of a story long buried. The entries spanned the months before his disappearance, and as she read, a picture emerged of a boy who was more perceptive than anyone had realized. Lucas wrote about his days at school, his favorite teachers, and his friends, but also about strange occurrences that no one else seemed to notice. There were mentions of a man in the shadows who lurked near the bus stop, glimpses of a car that never quite belonged in their neighborhood, and the unsettling feeling that someone was watching him. The handwriting wavered on some pages, as if the boy was afraid even to put these thoughts to paper. One entry stood out, a hurried scrawl dated just days before he vanished. Lucas described meeting a stranger who promised to help him escape, someone who seemed kind but whose eyes betrayed a secret. He didn't write what happened next, but the fear in his words was undeniable. Ms. Harper felt a chill run down her spine as she read and reread that page. It was a cry for help hidden in plain sight, a warning that had gone unheard. Outside the walls of the school, the journal stirred old memories and fears in the community. Ms. Harper decided she needed to share her findings, but carefully. She approached the principal, Mr. Reynolds, a man who had been at the school during Lucas's disappearance and who still carried the weight of that unresolved case. At first, he was skeptical, dismissing the journal as a relic of a child's imagination. But as Ms. Harper shared the eerie details and passages, his guarded demeanor softened. The possibility that Lucas had left clues, that the truth might still be within reach, reignited a hope many had thought lost. Together, they reached out to the local police department. Detective Mark Hayes, who had grown up in Maplewood and remembered the case well, was assigned to review the journal. For years, the files had grown cold, but the new evidence breathed life back into the investigation. Detective Hayes meticulously examined each entry, cross-referencing names and places, searching for leads that might finally break the silence. As the investigation reopened, Ms. Harper felt the weight of responsibility deepen. She was no longer just a teacher. She was a key figure in a quest to bring justice to a boy who had been lost for too long. She visited Sarah Miller, now living in a distant city, and shared the journal's existence. Sarah's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and fierce hope, tears streaming down her face as she held the tangible link to her son. The journal's secrets began to ripple through the town like a stone thrown into still water. Long forgotten fears resurfaced, old wounds reopened, but so did the determination to uncover the truth. For Ms. Harper, Lucas's story was no longer confined to the pages of a worn book. It had become a mission to bring light to the shadows that had swallowed a child and to heal a community fractured by loss. As the days passed, clues started to emerge. Names of people who might have seen something, strange activities reported near the bus stop, forgotten witnesses now willing to speak. The journal was a puzzle, each piece revealing a deeper, more complex truth. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Ms. Harper was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Lucas's voice, silenced for so long, was finally being heard. When Sarah Miller received the call from Ms. Harper, it was as if the world around her paused for a moment. The voice on the other end spoke cautiously, careful not to stir false hope, but the words Lucas's journal hit her like a tidal wave. For 10 long years, Sarah had clung to memories and fragments of her son, never fully surrendering to the crushing weight of despair. Now, here was a tangible connection, a glimpse into Lucas's mind and heart before he disappeared. Sarah's journey back to Maplewood was filled with a tempest of emotions. Fear, hope, anger, and disbelief tangled together like an impossible knot. The familiar streets, once comforting, now felt strange and heavy with the ghosts of the past. Yet, deep within, a fragile ember of hope sparked anew. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to find answers, to finally bring her son home. Ms. Harper welcomed Sarah with open arms, guiding her through the dusty school corridors and the quiet classroom where the journal had been discovered. The worn pages were laid out carefully on the desk, each word a whisper from the past. Sarah's hands trembled as she touched the fragile paper, tracing the handwriting she had once seen in Lucas's schoolwork but never in a diary. Tears spilled freely as she read the entries, the innocent dreams, the hidden fears, the coded cries for help. The community watched with a mix of sympathy and cautious optimism. For years, they had avoided talking about Lucas's disappearance, as if silence could bury the pain. But Sarah's return, combined with the journal's revelations, broke that fragile barrier. Neighbors began to share memories, some long buried, others recently recalled. Whispers of strange cars near the bus stop, unfamiliar faces lingering in the neighborhood, and unexplained noises at night began to surface. Detective Hayes intensified the investigation. The journal's clues pointed to people who had never been questioned fully, places that had been overlooked. Each day brought new pieces to the puzzle, but also new questions. How deep did the conspiracy run? Who had been watching Lucas? And most importantly, was he still alive? Sarah found solace in Ms. Harper's unwavering support. The teacher had become more than an educator. She was a beacon of hope and strength. Together, they sifted through the journal, decoding its messages, searching for patterns. Sarah shared photos, stories, and memories, painting a fuller picture of her son, a boy full of laughter, kindness, and dreams. Despite the uncertainty, Sarah refused to give up. Every dawn was a promise to keep searching, every night a prayer for Lucas's safety. Her heart ached with the weight of a mother's love and the torment of not knowing. But now, armed with a journal and a community slowly waking to the truth, she dared to dream again. The journal had opened a door to hope, to healing, and to a journey that would test the limits of courage and love. For Sarah, it was a chance to fight for her son, to reclaim a chapter stolen by time and silence. The road ahead was uncertain, but with every word uncovered, the light of possibility grew stronger. As the investigation deepened, the town of Maplewood began to stir with unease. The peaceful facade that had blanketed the community for years started to crack. revealing the shadows lurking beneath. The bus stop where Lucas disappeared, once a mundane part of children's daily routine, was now under scrutiny. Parents gathered, voices hushed but urgent, recalling strange sightings and unsettling events from the past. Detective Hayes and Ms. Harper worked tirelessly, piecing together accounts from residents who had long kept silent. An elderly man recalled a dark sedan parked near the bus stop on the morning Lucas vanished, a detail that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. A former school janitor remembered seeing a figure lurking near the playground at odd hours, someone who never spoke but watched intently. These fragmented memories, once dismissed or forgotten, now painted a troubling picture. The journal's cryptic entries hinted at a secret network, someone or something operating in the shadows, beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. Lucas's references to a man in the shadows and the promise of escape suggested that his disappearance was not random, but part of a sinister plan. Ms. Harper felt the weight of these revelations pressing down on her, but also the urgency to uncover the truth before it was buried again. Sarah, too, wrestled with the growing darkness. The more she learned, the more she feared the dangers that might still be lurking. Yet her determination only grew stronger. She refused to let fear silence her or her community. With Ms. Harper and Detective Hayes by her side, she began to organize meetings, encouraging neighbors to speak up and share what they knew, no matter how small or strange. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows over the town, Ms. Harper found herself alone in the classroom, the journal open before her. She traced the faded words, feeling the presence of Lucas's voice echo through time. It was then that she noticed a hidden message tucked between the lines, a code that Lucas had embedded, waiting for someone brave enough to decipher it. The message pointed to a location near the old forest on the town's edge, a place children were warned to avoid. The discovery set the community on edge. The forest had always been a source of local legends and whispered fears, but no one had dared to explore its depths for years. Now, with Lucas's journal leading them there, a new chapter was unfolding, one that promised answers but also unknown risks. As the team prepared for a search, the town held its breath. The shadows of the past were stirring, and with them, the hope of finding Lucas and finally bringing the truth into the light. The journey into the forest would test their courage and resolve, but the promise of uncovering what had been hidden for a decade was a beacon too strong to ignore. The morning air was thick with anticipation and an undercurrent of fear as Ms. Harper, Sarah, Detective Hayes, and a small search party gathered at the edge of the dense forest. The trees stood tall and silent, their dark branches reaching out like ancient fingers guarding the secrets within. The forest had always been a place of mystery and unease for the townspeople, a boundary between safety and the unknown. Today, it was the last hope of uncovering what had happened to Lucas. Equipped with flashlights, maps, and a fierce determination, the group stepped beneath the canopy of leaves, the muffled sounds of their footsteps swallowed by the thick underbrush. The air smelled of damp earth and moss, and a quiet stillness pressed around them, broken only by the occasional rustle of a bird or the distant call of a crow. Every shadow seemed alive, every movement suspicious. Ms. Harper clutched the journal tightly, the coded message Lucas had left burning in her mind. She led the way, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and hope. Sarah followed closely, her eyes scanning the forest floor for any sign, any clue that could lead them to her son. Detective Hayes moved carefully, his experienced gaze searching for footprints, discarded items, or anything out of place. Hours passed as they navigated through the tangled woods, following the cryptic directions from the journal. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, near a cluster of gnarled trees and a patch of wildflowers, Ms. Harper spotted something unusual, a small clearing with a weathered wooden box half buried beneath the leaves. With trembling hands, Sarah helped dig around the box, the weight of years pressing down on them. When they finally pried it open, inside lay a collection of items that made Sarah gasp, a faded photograph of Lucas, a small toy car he had cherished, and a folded letter written in his handwriting. The letter was brief but poignant, expressing fear, hope, and a desperate wish to be found. The discovery sent a wave of emotion crashing through the group. It was proof that Lucas had been close, that he had left pieces of himself behind, waiting for someone to follow. But it also raised new questions. Who had hidden these items? Why here? And most importantly, where was Lucas now? Detective Hayes radioed for backup, sensing that this was just the beginning of a deeper search. The forest had given up one secret, but many more awaited beneath its shadows. Sarah, though exhausted and overwhelmed, felt a flicker of renewed hope. The journey was far from over, but now they had a path, a tangible connection that would guide them forward. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the search party prepared to camp near the clearing. The night promised to be long and filled with uncertainty, but for Sarah and Ms. Harper, it was a night of possibility, the first step toward unraveling a decade-old mystery and bringing Lucas home. That night, gathered around a flickering campfire at the edge of the forest clearing, Sarah carefully unfolded Lucas's letter. The paper was yellowed and delicate, edges worn from years hidden beneath leaves and dirt. As she read aloud, her voice trembling, the words revealed a side of Lucas no one had ever known. A brave, frightened boy trapped in a world of shadows, but still clinging to hope. The letter spoke of a secret place, a hidden room, where Lucas believed he was being kept. He described how the man in the shadows had taken him one evening after school, a figure who had promised safety but only delivered fear. Lucas wrote about his attempts to leave clues for someone to find him, knowing he might not survive much longer if help didn't come soon. His words painted a vivid picture of isolation, courage, and a child's desperate will to be free. Ms. Harper listened intently, the gravity of Lucas's experience settling over her like a heavy cloak. She realized that the journal and the letter were pieces of a larger puzzle, a story of abduction and survival that had been hidden beneath the surface of their small town for years. Detective Hayes, standing nearby, took notes and shared his plans to bring in search dogs and technical equipment to scour the forest more thoroughly. Sarah's heart ached with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She whispered a promise to Lucas's memory, that they would not stop until he was found, no matter what it took. The campfire crackled, casting dancing shadows across their faces, and the forest seemed to listen in solemn silence. In the days that followed, the search expanded. Teams combed the forest, uncovering signs of old campsites, discarded belongings, and faint footprints that matched the timeline from Lucas's writings. Each discovery was a small victory, fueling hope and drawing the community together in a shared mission. But the deeper they delved, the more they sensed they were not alone. Strange noises in the night, fleeting glimpses of figures watching from the trees, and unexplained disturbances unsettled the searchers. The man in the shadows, mentioned in Lucas's letter, was no longer just a memory. He was a looming presence, a threat that might still be near. Amidst the tension, Ms. Harper and Sarah grew closer, bonded by grief and hope. They shared stories of Lucas's laughter, his dreams, and his kindness, refusing to let the darkness erase the boy they loved. Their strength inspired others, turning a painful tragedy into a rallying cry for justice and healing. As the search pressed on, the forest revealed its secrets slowly, teasing the edges of the truth. The hidden room Lucas had written about remained elusive, but the clues pointed them toward an old abandoned cabin deep within the woods, a place that might hold the key to unlocking the mystery once and for all. The abandoned cabin stood in eerie silence, hidden so deep within the forest that even seasoned hikers had never come across it. Vines curled around the decaying wood, and the front steps sagged with rot. But something about the place matched the description in Lucas's letter. Its isolation, its disrepair, and most importantly, the way it seemed forgotten by time. It wasn't just any structure. It felt like a place meant to be lost. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, staring at the crooked doorway as if it might open on its own. Her breathing slowed as her mind wrestled with the overwhelming thought. Lucas might have been here. Detective Hayes moved in first, weapon drawn, every step deliberate. Miss Harper followed, flashlight in hand, her heart pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the sound of the floorboards groaning beneath her. Inside, dust hung in the air like a fog of memory. The room was sparse, broken furniture, shattered windows, and scattered debris, but there were signs of life. Old food wrappers, a child's worn blanket in the corner, scratch marks on the wooden floor. Sarah moved slowly through the cabin, her eyes wide, until she found it. Etched into the wall beside a cracked window was a single word, M-O-M. She dropped to her knees, brushing her fingers over the carved letters, and tears welled in her eyes. It was Lucas's handwriting. She knew it instantly. Her boy had been here. He had waited, hoped, and left this message like a flare in the dark, trying to reach her across time. Detective Hayes called from the far side of the room. He had found a hidden door, partially obscured by a broken shelf. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. The air was colder there, damp and thick with the scent of mold. With flashlights illuminating the way, they descended slowly into what felt more like a bunker than a basement. What they found below was harrowing, a small, windowless room no bigger than a closet. Inside were a child's drawings taped to the walls, a makeshift bed of rags and blankets, and a rusted tin filled with marbles and crayons. Lucas's world had been reduced to this space. Ms. Harper picked up one of the drawings and immediately recognized the scene. The Maplewood Elementary School, surrounded by stick-figure children. In the corner was a small boy, alone, with a shadow looming over him. Sarah sat quietly on the floor, clutching one of Lucas's drawings, and whispered, "He was here. He was so close." Her grief now mingled with fury. Someone had done this to her son. Someone had taken him, hidden him, and stolen a decade of his life. But even in this place of sorrow, there were signs that Lucas had never given up. His letters, the journal, the carvings, all were breadcrumbs he had left behind, trusting that one day someone would follow them. And now at last they had. As they emerged from the basement, the mood among the group shifted. They were no longer searching aimlessly. They had evidence. They had truth. And they had a location. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Detective Hayes called in a full forensic team. They would analyze everything, DNA, fingerprints, even trace evidence in the soil. The hunt for the man in the shadows was no longer a whisper in the dark. It had become a chase. Sarah, though emotionally shattered, felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. She gripped Ms. Harper's hand tightly and whispered, "We're going to find him. I can feel it." Ms. Harper nodded, her eyes glistening, and replied, "Lucas is guiding us. We're not alone." The forensic team arrived before dawn, their equipment humming softly beneath the whispering trees. Yellow tape cordoned off the cabin, transforming it from a forgotten ruin into a full-blown crime scene. Technicians in white suits moved swiftly through the area, photographing, dusting, and collecting every piece of evidence that might shed light on Lucas's disappearance. But the most important clues had already been found. Lucas had been there, and he had tried to be found. Detective Hayes stood off to the side, speaking into his radio, his voice low but urgent. He had already sent images of the room, the child's drawings, and the carved M.O.M. back to the department for analysis. Sarah and Ms. Harper waited nearby, exhausted yet wired with adrenaline. Neither could tear their thoughts away from the boy who had once lived inside that basement cell, drawing, writing, waiting. Then came a breakthrough. One of the forensic technicians, a young woman named Clara, called Hayes over with a note of excitement in her voice. "We found a partial fingerprint," she said, holding up a plastic evidence bag. "It's fresh, within the last few days." That meant someone had recently returned to the cabin, someone who might still be watching. Hayes's mind went into overdrive. This wasn't just a historic crime scene, it was an active one. He ordered a perimeter sweep and deployed trail cams, drones, and officers along the nearby routes in and out of the forest. The man in the shadows might be closer than any of them had realized. Meanwhile, back at the Maplewood Police Department, Facial recognition software finally returned a result from a school security tape they'd reviewed again after the cabin discovery. It was a grainy image, taken from the day Lucas had vanished, of a man leaning against a parked car near the bus stop. He had gone unnoticed back then, assumed to be a passerby. But now, his face was matched to a known drifter, a man named Douglas Wynn, with a sealed juvenile record and a long history of mental instability, who had once worked as a janitor at Maplewood Elementary. Ms. Harper felt sick as she read his file. She remembered him now, quiet, strange, always lurking just outside of student areas. He had disappeared shortly after Lucas vanished. No one had thought much of it at the time. He'd seemed like just another temporary worker who moved on. But the truth had always been darker. Sarah's face hardened. "He took my son," she said, barely above a whisper. "He took him and hid him right under our noses." Hayes immediately issued a statewide alert. Wynn's last known whereabouts were only a few towns away, and now, with his identity confirmed, it was a race to find him before he vanished again. Officers combed old employment records, housing reports, and tips from locals, creating a map of everywhere Wynn had been since that terrible day 10 years ago. Back in the forest, as dusk fell, something even more chilling happened. One of the motion sensor cameras set near the cabin triggered. When they checked the footage, the image sent shivers through everyone who saw it, a blurry figure tall and gaunt, watching the cabin from behind the trees. He had stood there for a full 3 minutes, unmoving, as if he knew someone was inside but didn't care. Then, just as silently as he came, he vanished back into the woods. Hayes immediately doubled the patrols. They were close, so close. And Wynn, the man in the shadows, knew it. Sarah sat on a log near the fire that night, clutching Lucas's drawing in her hands, the edges now worn from being held so tightly. Miss Harper sat beside her, offering quiet comfort. Around them, officers kept watch, their silhouettes tense against the trees. No one slept. The truth had started to reveal itself. The shadow now had a name, and soon he would have no place left to hide. The air around the cabin had grown colder, heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Armed patrols were stationed throughout the area, each officer equipped with thermal imaging scopes and radios tuned to the same desperate frequency. No one wanted to miss even the faintest movement. The man they were hunting had hidden for a decade. He was cunning, unpredictable, and dangerous. Detective Hayes stared at the image of Douglas Wynn from the trail cam again. Blurred though it was, the sunken eyes and gaunt features matched every record they had on file. There was no more doubt. It was him. He had returned to the cabin, possibly to erase evidence, or worse, because he still thought of it as home. That meant they were circling close, and they couldn't afford to let him slip through their fingers again. Meanwhile, Ms. Harper and Sarah returned to town briefly under escort. There, they met with a forensic psychologist who specialized in child trauma recovery. Together, they pored over Lucas's journal entries once more, hoping to find a clue not yet uncovered. One entry, buried near the back of the book, caught Ms. Harper's eye. The handwriting was shaky and uneven, written clearly in fear. He said, "If I ever leave, she'll never find me. But I remember the sound of trains. I count the horns. 1, 2, sometimes 3 in a row." Ms. Harper's heart skipped. "Trains," she whispered. He heard trains from wherever he was being kept. Hayes leapt into action, cross-referencing all known properties tied to Wynn over the years that were within hearing distance of active train tracks. Within the hour, they had narrowed it down to one prime location. An old storage barn Wynn had inherited from an uncle, located just outside Milford, a quiet stretch of farmland nearly forgotten by the map. It hadn't been used for years, or so people thought. A tactical team was dispatched immediately. Sarah and Ms. Harper waited in tense silence, surrounded by maps, files, and images that had defined their lives for the last 10 days. It was as though time had both collapsed and stretched endlessly. Every minute felt both hopeful and unbearable. When the SWAT team arrived at the property, it was dusk. The barn sat crooked on its foundation, rust creeping along the corrugated roof like rot. The air was still. No lights, no movement. But inside, there was life. With precision and care, the officers breached the barn doors. What they found inside shocked even the most hardened among them. A back room, recently lived in, with a bed, canned food, and clothing strewn about. There was a strange smell, musty, with a trace of antiseptic. On a low wooden table sat something that brought tears to the eyes of every officer. A drawing of a woman with blonde hair holding a boy's hand. The caption read, in a shaky child scrawl, "My mom will find me." And then, movement. Behind a false wall in the barn, hidden by stacked crates, came the faintest noise. A shuffle. A breath. "Hold!" One officer barked, stepping forward, gun trained but voice gentle. "If anyone's there, we're here to help. Come out slowly. You're safe now." For a moment, nothing. Then a scraping sound. A wooden panel shifted, and from the shadows stepped a boy, taller now, thin, with hollow cheeks and dark, wary eyes. He held a sketchbook close to his chest like a shield. His voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Are you the one she sent?" The officer's eyes widened. "Lucas." The boy nodded slowly, his lip trembling. "She said she'd find me. She said she wouldn't stop." At that moment, everything broke. Every wall of fear, every haunting silence, every lonely night endured by a mother and her son. Lucas was alive, and he remembered, not just the pain, but the promise. Back in town, when the call came through, Sarah collapsed into Ms. Harper's arms, overcome with sobs of disbelief and joy. After 10 years of silence, her son had spoken. The nightmare was almost over. Lucas sat on the hospital bed, the thin cotton sheet draped over his knees as nurses gently moved around him, checking his vitals and whispering updates to a clipboard. A child no longer, but not yet a young man, his body bore the toll of the years he had survived. Bruises faded to scars, ribs more visible than they should have been, and eyes too old for someone his age. But he was alive. He had survived. And now, finally, he was no longer alone. Detective Hayes stood just outside the room, watching through the glass with silent awe. He had seen many things in his career, unspeakable things, but this moment, this quiet miracle, was something sacred. Lucas was responsive. He was speaking, carefully, haltingly, but he remembered. And he remembered everything. Sarah walked slowly down the corridor, her hands shaking, her breath ragged. She wasn't ready, but she had waited 10 years for this. Every second of pain, every unanswered question had led to this hallway, this room. Ms. Harper gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "He's ready," she said softly. Sarah stepped into the room. Lucas looked up. There was a long, quiet pause, like the world stopped moving. Sarah's voice cracked as she whispered, "Lucas." His eyes, those same brown eyes she had seen every night in her dreams, filled with tears. The notebook in his hands slipped to the bed. "Mom," he choked. And then she ran to him, crossing the room in seconds, falling to her knees beside the bed and wrapping him in her arms. It was awkward. He had grown, she had aged, but the bond between them snapped back into place like a broken bone healing in an instant. They wept, their sobs echoing down the corridor, too raw and full to be contained. "I look for you every day," she cried into his shoulder. "I waited every day," he whispered back. "I didn't forget. I knew you'd find me." Outside the room, nurses turned away to wipe their eyes. Ms. Harper clutched her chest, overwhelmed with emotion. Hayes turned his back, pretending to check his phone, though his eyes blurred with tears. Over the next few hours, Lucas told his story. Bit by bit, he revealed the horror of what had happened after he was taken. Douglaswin had lured him near the bus stop with a soft voice and a fake concern. "Your mom asked me to get you," he had said, showing a photograph of Sarah. Lucas had hesitated, but he had only been 7. He had trusted, and by the time he realized something was wrong, it was too late. The years after were a blur of silence, manipulation, and shifting captivity. Wynn had kept him first in the basement of the cabin, feeding him stories about the world ending, telling him his mother was gone, and that no one was looking for him. When Lucas grew older and stronger, Wynn moved him, sometimes to sheds, barns, or secluded trailers, always keeping him hidden, always one step ahead. But Lucas had never truly believed Wynn. He remembered his mother's face, her voice. He held on to it like a flame in the dark. He drew her picture over and over, told stories to himself in whispers at night. And when he found scraps of paper or broken pencils, he wrote in secret. His journal had been his resistance, his way of surviving. And when he realized Wynn had returned to the old cabin, the place where it had all started, Lucas knew it was a chance. He slipped the journal into the desk, hoping someone would find it. He didn't know who. He just prayed. Then she did, he said, looking at Ms. Harper. You found it. You read it. Ms. Harper nodded, unable to speak. Sarah kissed her son's forehead, her tears falling into his hair. You brought me home, Lucas said. You both did. And for the first time in over a decade, Sarah smiled with her whole heart. The nightmare was breaking. Her son was safe. Her son was home. But across town, in the fading light, Douglas Wynn was still out there, watching, moving, slipping through the cracks of the world like a ghost. The final chapter had yet to be written. The news of Lucas's rescue spread quickly. In a matter of hours, the quiet hospital where he was recovering turned into a fortress of flashing cameras, local reporters, and officers trying to keep order. Every headline carried the same miracle. Missing boy found alive after 10 years. But behind the public celebration, behind the smiles and tears, an unspoken truth haunted everyone who knew the real story. Douglas Wynn was still free. Detective Hayes stood in the sheriff's war room, now covered in maps, photographs, and strings that traced Wynn's last known movements. The barn had been filled with evidence, food supplies, a list of back roads, burner phones, but no sign of Wynn himself. It was as if he'd vanished once again. But Hayes knew better. Wynn didn't run blindly. He calculated. He waited. And most of all, he hated being exposed. We need to assume he's still watching, Hayes told the task force. This man has evaded capture for a decade. He knows we're coming, and he's not done. Meanwhile, Sarah and Lucas were moved to a secured recovery facility outside of town, away from the noise and public frenzy. Though physically safe, Lucas often sat by the window, staring at the trees for hours, his sketchbook in hand. Sarah tried to keep him distracted with warm meals, stories from when he was young, and even silly photos from family albums. But the fear hadn't left his eyes. He's still out there, isn't he? Lucas asked quietly one night. Sarah nodded, unable to lie. Yes, but not for long. I promise. Ms. Harper visited often, sitting with Lucas and gently encouraging him to draw or speak. One afternoon, while flipping through a sketchbook, she came across something chilling. A recent drawing showed Wynn's face, detailed, sharp, and frighteningly accurate. But in the background was something new. A symbol, a strange marking on a wooden post, partially hidden behind the trees. What is this, Lucas? She asked gently. He hesitated. That was on the gate at the last place he took me. It was carved into the wood. He said if anything ever happened to him, someone would come. Ms. Harper's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a hiding place. It was part of something larger. One had contacts, maybe followers, maybe worse. Back at the station, Hayes received a tip. A hiker had spotted someone matching Wynn's description heading toward an abandoned silo in the forest north of town. A drone was dispatched and picked up recent movement around the area. No fires, no light, but footprints. Fresh ones. We're moving in, Hayes ordered. Tonight. But before the team could mobilize, something unexpected happened. A package was delivered to the police station. No return address. Inside was a small flash drive, labeled only with the letter L. Hayes inserted it into a secure laptop. A video began to play. The screen flickered before revealing Douglas Wynn, standing in what appeared to be a dimly lit shack. His hair was longer, his eyes darker, but his voice calm. Calculated. If you're watching this, he said, then the boy is home. And you've stolen what was mine. He was safe with me, protected from a world that didn't deserve him. Hayes clenched his jaw. But I am not angry. No, I am patient. I'm always watching. And I have more than one plan. The screen cut to black. A second later, text appeared. I left something behind. Hayes stood abruptly. Get forensics on this. Find the source of the recording. Find that shack. Now. Sarah, upon hearing about the video, turned pale. He's not going to let go, is he? She asked Hayes later that evening. No, he admitted. Not until we ended. All of it. But they were no longer playing his game. This time, they had the journal. They had Lucas. They had truth. And with each step forward, the shadow Wynn had cast for 10 years was beginning to fade. The hunt wasn't over, but the tables had turned. The flash drive had been scrubbed clean of digital fingerprints. Whoever had delivered it knew how to erase a trail. Still, Detective Hayes wasn't about to let the silence stop him. He had dealt with men like Douglas Wynn before, monsters with messiah complexes who believed their crimes were acts of twisted justice. But there was something more chilling about Wynn. He didn't rage. He planned. He waited. And now he was taunting them. At the Secured Recovery Center, Lucas couldn't sleep. The video had shaken him. Wynn's voice had always been laced with a poisonous calm, like a lullaby that never ended. But the boy wasn't powerless anymore. He'd spent the day quietly going through his memories with Miss Harper, hoping something, anything, would offer a clue. And then, just before dinner, it came to him. He used to talk to someone, Lucas said, on a shortwave radio. Every Thursday, same time. He called him the Shepherd. Hayes was immediately alerted. That name, the Shepherd, had appeared once before in an old missing child case nearly 15 years back. It had been dismissed as a rumor. Now it was a lead. With renewed urgency, Hayes and his team combed through archived records, focusing on known associates of Wynn, truck drivers, survivalists, fringe group members. Then they found something, an old survivalist newsletter mailed out quarterly to a small network of off-the-grid loners. In one issue from 7 years ago, there was an article signed only Shepherd. The author wrote about protecting innocence, removing children from toxic systems, and building sanctuaries for the chosen few. The writing matched the language Wynn had used in his video almost word for word. It was time to strike. The forensic team enhanced the video Wynn had sent. In the corner, partially obscured, was a rusted metal sign, property of Eastridge Timber Company, Mill Site 3. The location had been abandoned for decades and lay deep in the woods, 20 miles beyond the edge of town. A team was assembled. Hayes led it personally, joined by state troopers and tactical officers. They would sweep the site at dawn, with drones providing overhead surveillance. Meanwhile, Sarah sat with Lucas, holding his hand tightly as they waited in silence. Every passing hour felt like a lifetime. She had her son back, but the nightmare wouldn't be over until Wynn was caught, until the fear was gone for good. At 5 a.m., the operation began. Fog clung to the trees as the convoy crept into the forest. The air was still too still. When they reached Mill Site 3, the place looked deserted. Old silos tilted with age and moss-covered storage shacks stood like forgotten graves. But inside one of them, the thermal drone picked up movement. They breached fast and quiet. The first shack was empty. So was the second. Then, behind a third, partially buried in earth and covered in camouflage netting, they found a hatch. Underground. Inside, the smell of oil and decay hit them instantly. Flashlights cut through the dark as they descended a narrow metal ladder. It led to a long tunnel. At the end of it, a room. And in the center of that room, sitting calmly at a table, was Douglas Wynn. He smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said, voice smooth and unshaken. "Did the boy send you?" Hayes didn't reply. He gave the signal. Wynn was tackled, restrained, and cuffed. He didn't fight. "Don't think it's over," Wynn said as they dragged him out. "You've only removed the head. The body still breathes." But Hayes wasn't interested in threats. Wynn was done. He'd be locked away forever, and every note, every name, every journal entry would be scoured for accomplices. The network would be dismantled, and the light would finally touch the darkest corners Wynn had tried to hide in. Back at the center, Sarah's phone rang. Hayes' voice came through clearly. "We got him." Sarah turned to Lucas. "It's over," she whispered, voice breaking. "He can't hurt you anymore." For the first time in 10 years, Lucas exhaled and smiled. The news of Douglas Wynn's capture rippled through the town like the lifting of a long-standing curse. For a decade, the name had loomed in whispers and unfinished conversations, a dark stain no one could scrub away. But now, for the first time, there was closure. The man responsible for the disappearance of countless children, including Lucas, was behind bars, awaiting a trial that promised to be one of the most watched in state history. Detective Hayes sat across from Wynn in an interrogation room, just once more before the case was handed off to federal prosecutors. Wynn's demeanor hadn't changed. Calm, collected, almost smug. But he spoke no further. He had said what he wanted to say in his video, and now he seemed content to remain silent, his part in the game over. But Hayes wasn't interested in words anymore. He wanted records, names, clues that would expose every branch of the network when it claimed existed. And he got them. In Wynn's underground hideout, officers found a locked trunk filled with flash drives, old cassette recordings, and notebooks. One journal contained meticulous notes on each of the children Wynn had considered taking. Many had thankfully never been approached, but the fact that they were cataloged at all sent a chill through even the most seasoned officers. Among the files were names, aliases, code names, and symbols. The shepherd was real, but not alone. There had been others. The FBI stepped in, and suddenly the case expanded far beyond their small town. But for Sarah and Lucas, the outside world faded as they focused on something more important: healing. Lucas started therapy with a trauma specialist the FBI had flown in, someone who had worked with recovered children from similar abductions. His progress was slow but steady. He still had nightmares, still flinched at certain sounds. But he was drawing again, vivid sketches of places he remembered, faces from both fear and comfort. And when he drew Sarah, he made sure to get the smile right. Sarah, too, had to relearn how to be a mother. 10 years had passed. Lucas was no longer the little boy she'd once tucked in with bedtime stories. He was different now, quieter, but resilient. Ms. Harper, who had been at the heart of the story all along, was finally able to breathe. Her discovery of the journal hadn't just saved a boy, it had changed everything. She'd been offered television interviews, awards, even a book deal, but she declined them all. Instead, she went back to her classroom and started a new initiative, a safe space program for students to share anything, anonymously or openly, without fear or shame. It was during one of those quiet afternoons in the classroom that she found another note. This time, tucked not in a journal, but inside a desk drawer, handwritten in a boy's careful scrawl. "Thank you for finding me, Ed." She pressed the note to her heart, tears forming but not falling. It wasn't about recognition. It was about knowing she'd made a difference. At home, Sarah and Lucas took small steps together. They walked around the block, then around the park. They tried new recipes, played old board games, relearned how to laugh, softly at first, then louder. They planted a garden behind the house. Sunflowers, Lucas's choice. He said they reminded him of warmth, of a light that always looked for the sun. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, Lucas turned to Sarah and asked, "Can we go to the ocean someday?" Sarah smiled. "Anywhere you want." The past could never be erased. The scars would never fully fade. But the future, after all the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, was finally theirs to write. And they were ready. A year later, the town had changed, but perhaps the biggest change was in how people looked at each other. No longer with silent fear or lingering suspicion, but with something that had been missing for too long: trust. The case of Lucas Harper had become a symbol, not of tragedy, but of recovery. The community had endured the unthinkable and come through stronger, their hearts marked not by loss but by perseverance. Lucas stood on a small wooden stage, nervously holding a sheet of paper in his hand. It was the end-of-year student assembly, and despite all he had been through, he had insisted on writing something to say. Not many in the crowd knew what he was about to do. Sarah sat in the front row, hands clenched together, her heart pounding in quiet pride. "Hi," Lucas began, voice slightly shaky but growing steadier with each word. "Some of you know me, some don't, but I just wanted to say thank you." The room fell utterly still. "I was gone for a long time," he continued, "and a lot of people didn't give up looking for me. Some never even met me and still tried. That means something. It means a lot." Ms. Harper wiped her eyes as Lucas looked up from the page. I was scared for a long time. I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again. But I do now. I'm back. I'm home. And I'm okay." A wave of applause began, soft at first, then louder, growing into a standing ovation that echoed through the school halls. Lucas smiled, cheeks flushed but beaming. For the first time in over a decade, he wasn't just the boy who went missing. He was the boy who came back. That evening, Sarah and Lucas finally made the trip they'd been planning for months: the ocean. The car ride was long but filled with music and quiet laughter. Sarah stole glances at her son in the rearview mirror. Older now, wiser in ways no child should have to be, but healing. She knew that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one they were now walking together. When they arrived, the ocean stretched out endlessly before them, a shimmering blanket of possibility. Lucas ran toward the waves, arms open, laughing as the salty breeze swept through his hair. Sarah followed, slower, her eyes glistening with joy. They stood together at the shoreline, feet buried in the wet sand as the tide lapped against their ankles. Lucas looked up at her. "It's even bigger than I imagined." Sarah smiled. "It always is when you finally get there." Back in town, Detective Hayes officially closed the Harper case. He received a commendation for his work, though he never sought praise. For him, the true reward was that single moment in the courtroom when Lucas stood, hand in Sarah's, and looked Douglas Wynn in the eye without fear. Justice, real and undeniable, had been served. And Ms. Harper? She was named Teacher of the Year. But more importantly, she had become the quiet hero of the town. Someone who listened, who noticed, who believed. In the years that followed, Lucas grew into a young man with a talent for storytelling and a passion for helping others. He spoke at schools, sharing his journey not to relive the past, but to help others find their way through the darkness. He often said that no one rescues themselves alone, that it takes kindness, courage, and someone willing to listen when others look away. The journal that had once been hidden in an old desk drawer was now framed on the wall of the school library, beneath a plaque that read, "To the quiet voices that cry for help, and the brave hearts who hear them." The story of a boy who vanished at a school bus stop didn't end in tragedy. It ended in strength, in love, in a life reclaimed. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the ocean's endless surface, Sarah held her son's hand and whispered, "We made it." Lucas smiled. They both did. Thank you for following the emotional journey of kid missing from school bus stop. 10 years later, teacher uncovers old journal and desk. This was not just a story about a missing child. It was a story about the power of hope, the strength of a mother's love, the quiet courage of a dedicated teacher, and the unshakable belief that even after the darkest of nights, the sun will rise again. In a world where many stories end in heartbreak, this one ends in healing. It reminds us that no matter how much time passes, no matter how far someone is lost, there is always a chance, however small, for redemption, reunion, and rebirth. If this story touched your heart, if you found yourself holding your breath, shedding a tear, or feeling inspired by the resilience of the human spirit, we kindly invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share powerful stories that matter, stories of truth, hope, and humanity. Let us know what you felt, what moved you most, or even share your own story in the comments. We read every single one, and your voice matters here. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop believing. Subscribe now and be part of a growing community that believes in the light that still exists in the world.